Rediscovering God's Original Intent. Chapter 1. The Naked Truth. Nakedness. A word that often stirs discomfort, provokes controversy, and carries a burden of shame. Yet, at the very beginning of human existence, in the garden where the world was new and unspoiled, nakedness was a state of perfection. The book of Genesis tells us that God created Adam and Eve in his image, naked and unashamed. And he declared his creation very good. How then did something God intended as pure and good become a source of embarrassment and sin? This chapter seeks to uncover the truth about nakedness, examining how human interpretations have distorted a divine design. A divine beginning. In the creation story, nakedness symbolizes innocence, trust, and a harmonious relationship with God and creation. Adam and Eve walked freely in the Garden of Eden, their nakedness unburdened by self-consciousness or shame. It was only after their disobedience, when they ate the forbidden fruit, that their eyes were opened, and they felt the need to cover themselves. Shame entered the picture not because nakedness itself was sinful, but because sin altered their perception of it. In their fallen state, they could no longer see themselves or each other through the lens of divine purity. God's response to their newfound shame is telling. He doesn't declare their nakedness sinful. Instead, he provides garments to cover them, acknowledging their altered state. This act reflects compassion rather than condemnation. Yet, over centuries, humanity has taken this moment and twisted its meaning, equating nakedness with sinfulness rather than understanding it as a symbol of human vulnerability and a need for God's grace. Historical shifts in perception. The association of nakedness with sin did not emerge solely from the Genesis narrative. Historical and cultural developments have played a significant role in shaping this perspective. Early religious movements, particularly within Christianity, emphasized the fallen nature of humanity and the need to control bodily desires. This emphasis often translated into strict modesty codes and a deep mistrust of the body. During the colonial era, European missionaries encountered indigenous communities that lived without clothing, often as an adaptation to their environment. These missionaries, armed with their cultural and religious biases, deemed such practices immoral and sought to impose their own standards of dress. The result was a conflation of nakedness with savagery and sinfulness, reinforcing the idea that the human body needed to be hidden to be acceptable. Even beyond religious contexts, societal norms have perpetuated the idea that nakedness is inherently shameful. Art, fashion, and public policies have all been influenced by this belief, often driven more by societal control than spiritual insight. The human body, designed by God, has become a battleground for debates about morality, modesty, and propriety. Philosophical insights on modesty. When we examine modesty laws and cultural norms, it becomes clear that many of them are less about divine intention and more about societal control. Throughout history, those in power have often used modesty as a tool to regulate behavior, particularly that of women. By dictating what can and cannot be shown, societies have enforced hierarchies, suppressed individuality, and perpetuated shame. Contrast this with indigenous cultures that have thrived for centuries without associating nakedness with sin. In many of these communities, nakedness is a natural state, unburdened by the layers of shame imposed by external forces. These cultures remind us that the human body is neither inherently sinful nor inherently shameful. It is a vessel of life, a testament to the Creator's craftsmanship. It is worth questioning. Who benefits from the perpetuation of shame around nakedness? Often, it is those who seek to control, to impose their will, or to distract from deeper spiritual truths. God's focus has always been on the condition of the heart, not the state of dress. Returning to God's vision. When we strip away cultural and historical layers of shame, we are left with the profound truth of God's original design. Nakedness in the Garden of Eden was not a symbol of sin, but of purity, simplicity, and trust. The shame that now surrounds it is a human addition, a result of sin's distortion. In reclaiming the divine perspective on nakedness, we are reminded of our own vulnerability and our dependence on God. Nakedness, both physical and spiritual, invites us to come before Him as we are, without pretense or concealment. It is a call to authenticity, to shed the burdens of shame, and to embrace the freedom of being fully known and fully loved. As we move forward, let us challenge the narratives that equate nakedness with sin. Let us seek a deeper understanding of God's intention for His creation, remembering that He declared it very good. Nakedness is not the problem. The problem lies in our broken perception. And in that recognition lies the possibility of healing and restoration. Chapter 2: Possessions and the Illusion of Ownership. Introduction. Imagine a world where the fruits of the earth are freely shared, where rivers run with water for all, and where no boundary divides the land beneath our feet. This vision isn't an idealistic dream, but a reflection of nature's original design, an abundant system where everything is given freely by the Creator. The sun does not charge for its light, nor do the trees keep their fruit from passing hands. Yet, humanity has created a system that transforms these gifts into commodities, fencing off what was once shared. Why is it that taking or sharing resources is often labeled as sinful, while hoarding and privatizing them is seen as virtuous? To understand this paradox, we must explore the origins and implications of ownership. Historical perspective. The concept of private property is relatively new in the grand timeline of human history. For millennia, humans lived as hunter-gatherers in communities that shared resources. The shift began with the agricultural revolution, approximately 10,000 years ago, when humans settled and began cultivating land. Ownership of land and resources became tied to survival, and thus, laws and systems to enforce possession emerged. These systems were further solidified during periods of colonial expansion, where entire continents were divided, claimed, and traded as property. In these periods, ownership was often justified by might or divine right, with little regard for the existing inhabitants who had lived harmoniously with the land for generations. The rise of capitalism further entrenched these ideas, equating value with accumulation. Under the system, wealth was no longer seen as a communal benefit, but as an individual success, a notion that persists today, shaping laws and societal norms. Theological reflection. Religious traditions often paint a contrasting picture, emphasizing sharing and communal living as divine principles. In the Christian tradition, the early followers of Jesus lived communally, as described in the book of Acts. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need, Acts 2 verses 44 to 45. This model of generosity was not just an act of charity, but a reflection of their understanding of God's abundance. Other traditions echo this sentiment. Indigenous spiritualities often view the earth as a shared mother, providing for all her children. Islam, through the principle of zakat, mandates sharing wealth with the less fortunate, recognizing that all riches ultimately belong to God. Despite these teachings, modern economic systems frequently prioritize individual gain over communal well-being, leading to systemic greed and inequality. Theologians and scholars have long critiqued this distortion. For instance, liberation theology challenges the concentration of wealth and power, advocating for systems that align more closely with divine generosity. Yet, these perspectives are often overshadowed by narratives that equate prosperity with divine favor, reinforcing cycles of greed. Conclusion. Possession and property, as we understand them today, are human constructs that often contradict the principles of divine generosity. While laws around ownership claim to maintain order, they frequently prioritize individual greed over communal well-being. By questioning these constructs, we can begin to reimagine a world more aligned with the Creator's intent, a world where abundance is shared freely, as it was always meant to be. Perhaps the real sin lies not in sharing resources, but in hoarding them, distorting the sacred balance of giving and receiving. Chapter 3: The Harmony of Human Desire. Introduction. Human intimacy holds a profound, sacred significance, bridging the gap between creation and connection. It is a gift, a divine expression of love that fosters both life and unity. Far from being a source of shame or sin, intimacy, when approached with love and responsibility, becomes a reflection of the divine intention for human flourishing. In this chapter, we will explore how reframing the perception of sex as sinful can reveal its true purpose, to harmonize human desire with divine love and spiritual growth. The sacred nature of intimacy. From the dawn of humanity, physical intimacy has played a dual role as a means of procreation and a vessel for emotional and spiritual connection. Ancient cultures often revered sexual union as sacred, recognizing its capacity to bridge the material and the spiritual realms. For instance, in Hindu traditions, the concept of Shakti and Shiva symbolizes the balance of feminine and masculine energies, often depicted through their divine union. Intimacy serves as a conduit for vulnerability and trust, strengthening the bonds between individuals. It is in these moments of connection that humans mirror the divine, creating life, sharing love, and fostering unity. These acts are not separate from spirituality, but are deeply embedded within it. When framed in this way, intimacy transcends the physical act and becomes an experience of wholeness and harmony. Cultural analysis: the evolution of sexual morality. Throughout history, perceptions of sex and intimacy have been shaped by cultural, religious, and political forces. In particular, patriarchal structures have sought to control sexuality, often relegating it to the realm of sin and shame, especially for women. This control was frequently justified by misinterpreted religious texts or societal norms that prioritized reproduction over mutual fulfillment. For example, in many Western societies, the rise of patriarchal interpretations of Abrahamic religions placed rigid constraints on women's sexuality. These interpretations often ignored the celebratory and affirming views of intimacy found in the same scriptures. Such distortions served to consolidate power, limiting women's autonomy and reducing intimacy to a transactional act tied to reproduction and male authority. This stigmatization of desire created cycles of guilt and repression, leaving many disconnected from their own bodies and relationships. It's essential to recognize these cultural constructs for what they are: human-imposed limitations rather than divine decrees. By disentangling spirituality from these historical constraints, we can reclaim a more harmonious understanding of desire. Spiritual perspective on love and intimacy. Sacred texts and spiritual teachings often highlight the sanctity of love and union. In the Bible, the Song of Solomon celebrates romantic and physical love in poetic detail, portraying it as a divine gift. Similarly, in many indigenous traditions, sexuality is intertwined with creation myths and spiritual practices, emphasizing its role in connecting individuals to the divine and to each other. Modern spirituality also emphasizes the value of mutual respect, consent, and responsibility in intimate relationships. When approached with mindfulness and care, intimacy becomes an act of worship, an acknowledgement of the divine within ourselves and our partners. In this light, desire is not something to be suppressed, but rather embraced as a natural and sacred aspect of human life. Moreover, societies thrive when their members experience healthy, respectful relationships. Intimacy based on mutual respect fosters emotional well-being, strengthens families, and builds compassionate communities. These outcomes align closely with spiritual ideals of love, harmony, and connection. Conclusion. The stigmatization of human desire as sinful has long overshadowed its sacred and harmonious purpose. Yet, when viewed through the lens of divine love and responsibility, intimacy reveals itself as an expression of God's intention for human connection and flourishing. By reframing intimacy as a sacred act, we honor the divine within ourselves and our relationships, fostering a deeper sense of unity and purpose. Through love and respect, we can restore the harmony of human desire, aligning it with the spiritual and emotional dimensions of our existence.